What I love about bringing subject matter experts to the Cyberwire hash table is that we definitely get a wide number of viewpoints about what is and what isn't working in the InfoSec community today. And speaking of the hash table, next up is my conversation with Tim Brown, the CISO for SolarWinds. Yes, that's SolarWinds. Tim Brown is currently the CISO for SolarWinds. He joined the company in 2017 as the VP of Security about 3 years before the SolarWinds attacks. After the incident, he got the CISO title. But he's had a long 30-year career wearing many hats. He's been an IT and security engineer, a strategy guy, a security architect, a cloud security CTO, a journalist. He's even been a Dell Fellow. I started out by asking him what was the thing that attracted him to InfoSec.
Yeah, security is always changing, right? And there's always something new. I love the challenge of something new happening every day. I sometimes get more than I ask for, but I really do like the challenge of everything new and changing. It's never boring, right? We have plenty to do.
I love that too. It's the reason I love this field, but you know what I hate about it? It changes all the time. So
it is kind of a love-hate relationship.
So on December 12, 2020, FireEye announced to the world that it had been compromised, but what has become the poster child for supply chain attacks and the nightmare for all CISOs responding to a breach in our internal networks. So, Tim, in broad terms, can you describe what the hackers behind the Nobelium attack campaign did? What was their process?
Yeah, absolutely. You're one of the few people that had known the term Nobelium. That was what Microsoft called the attackers, Nobelium. We also know them as, the Russian SVR, also know them as APT29. So a number of different names for them. So FireEye ended up discovering that SolarWinds had shipped tainted code and contacted us on December 12th. December 13th, everything went public. Culminated with us doing issuing a notice, a 10Q, a 10K on early Monday morning. So attack was, just as we said, right? We ended up, the threat actor essentially compromised email first, did reconnaissance for a good period of time, over a year doing reconnaissance. Then essentially did a test run in October where they inserted no code. Came back in February and inserted 2,500 lines of code, which was really sunburst code. That stayed in releases from March to June, and then they left. So attack against us was very specific, very targeted, very mission-centric, very quiet. It wasn't like they're in our environment making noise all the time. Their whole model was, how do we do it stealthily? And then the code that they dropped did things that made it hard to detect, right? So it wouldn't run inside of SolarWinds domains, wouldn't run inside of Microsoft's domain, wouldn't run in a number of domains. Waited 14 days before it started. So very thoughtful, right, from an attack perspective. I don't say it's innovative. I don't think it's like machine learning type stuff, but very, very thoughtful in the way they attacked us and others. So supply chain, the first time we called it a supply chain attack was that first day, because they didn't attack our source code system where they would have been discovered. What they attacked was one of our transient virtual machines that's part of our build process. That's where the insertion was. We couldn't find the source code anywhere, wasn't in any of our systems. So it happened in our supply chain. What came to be known very quickly, though, is where SolarWinds participated in the larger supply chains around the world and where we sat at our customers became very important. And that's what really sparked the big supply chain conversations now, simply because we were in the middle of supply chains and people didn't even know we were there. So having them discover that, so as I say, I had my Christmas ruined, but a lot of IT folks around the world, also had their, Christmas ruined, trying to figure out, hey, is SolarWinds here? Where is it? What's it doing? What versions are we on? So quite a journey.
Well, I agree with you. It wasn't like we've never heard of supply chain attacks before. They've been in the public sphere many times, but this seemed to be prominent notice because of how successful SolarWinds is, all the customers.
Yeah. it's a good thing, right? When you look at some good that comes out of it, it's the discussions around supply chains, the discussions of us, how do we, get vendors more resilient, but also how do we figure out what's in the supply chain at our customers? And so those conversations starting is, one of the kind of the good things that has come out of it. Legislation starting to come out of it, executive orders coming out of it. So the progress is, we hate to see something bad happen, but it's good that we see something good come out of it.
So let's talk about that, because you guys came up with some new strategy, all right, to handle security going forward. You call it secure by design, right? And you've come up with a number of tactics to implement it at SolarWinds. It's triple build software development, zero trust, red teams, and security awareness training. Let's start with triple build software development process. What is that?
One of the most important things we had to do was, reinstill confidence in our customer base, right? Part of doing that is saying, hey, we're not just as good as everybody, we're better, right? We took 6 months off from development of new features, and the full engineering staff focused on the secure by design efforts. So part of those secure by design efforts were, build processes. So with 12 products essentially making up Orion, we had a multiple repos, right, for information. We consolidated down to one repo. That was kind of stage one. Did a two-way build to start with. So we go from source code to product. We then take that product that's built, we install the product, we decompile it and get back to source code. So we can do source code checks against the decompiled code, C#. So by being able to do that, we get assurance that source code matched what was in the release, right? So second part of it was to take our build environment and move it to AWS, then make it all ephemeral, so nothing exists, everything's in code, so nothing to attack. Third part was multiple build pipelines, and multiple build pipelines needed to be deterministic, right? You know that, if you build something one time, you build it again a minute later, that you're not deterministic anymore because time changed. So we were able to make certain languages deterministic, Java, C#. Having them deterministic means that I can do multiple builds and then compare them at the end and only ship when those builds are compared. Why that's important is because my production build has 2 people having access to it. My staging build has about 30. My development build probably, in the hundreds, right? So by comparing them, I end up saying, well, you would need collusion among multiple people. So those 2 people that are in charge of production don't have access to dev or staging. So in order to affect builds now, you'd have to have collusion among multiple people. Really taking an assumed breach process across the board and saying, okay, if Tim Brown has been breached, what would happen? Now, our incident didn't show Insider, but very well could be possible in the future, possible for somebody else. So it's important to think about that when you're doing builds and everywhere along your line, whether it's your SRE team, whether it's your build team, how do you take that assumed breach process and then add protections over the top?
So the triple build software development process is really a protection against the insider threat to protect against outsiders inserting code like what happened your incident.
So it would protect against that because they inserted into the build process. So GitHub did not match what the product was that was produced. So that insertion would get checked too. We plus did things on GitHub. So we always did peer reviews. Now we have peer reviews plus architect reviews. So additional reviews on anything that's checked in. Additional red teaming of the environments as well.
So the triple build software development process protects against insiders and protects against outside breach infecting your source code, because it's going to check the beginning stages of the code against what happens at the end and make sure they're the same.
Correct. So much more resilient from any build process. And we wrote white papers on it, and we've done things like that to try to bring it to the community. So it's been in place really since July, August of 21. So that just adds resilience. It adds assumed breach. It says a single individual won't be able to affect the builds. take collusion, those types of things. Just really hardens that whole process.
So let's talk about one of the other tactics, and it comes to mind immediately after you say all that. Your red team tactic to go after this process, I'm assuming, right? You're sending your red teams to break that process. So how does that work?
We had a part-time red team before, right? Post-incident, we have a full-time red team. Now, the first object of my red team was, both infrastructure testing, but then every component that is associated with the build system, right? So I trust certain things that they probably do well, right? Salesforce is fine. Palo Alto is fine, as you know, right? They're fine. But what about my configuration of them? Right? Is my configuration where it needs to be? So my red teams focus on, can I take advantage of the configuration that you have in place to circumvent security controls? So as opposed to always looking for domain admin, these guys are looking to say, okay, when I look at my firewall, all right, who has access? What's change control look like? How are my checks and balances there? What is my configuration there? GitHub, same idea. How many admins do I have? What if I take over one admin? Can he affect something else? So do I have protections in place from that? So on the SaaS services, it's often looking at, okay, I've got a well-configured SaaS service or a well-configured product. And is that configuration resilient to attack? So we've done that for the components of essentially the build system and always looking to tighten things down a little bit, right? So Red Team hasn't gotten through, but they've tightened stuff down. They said, okay, if this was here, we could have done this. So it's a double check. So the red teams are very important to us. Now we're starting on mission and business critical assets and those applications, and we'll spin back around and redo essentially build system.
So is the red team in this new strategy, Tim, is that purely for the software development process, or do you turn them loose on the network configuration also?
Yeah, I turn them loose on the network. I turn them loose on the infrastructure as well.
Are they dipping their toe into adversary emulation? Are they trying to duplicate what Nobelium did?
Yeah, in some ways, the Nobelium guys were coming into our environment, absolutely, right? Secondary attacks, not so much, right? Secondary attacks were very specific. Orion had to be public facing. You had to talk to a command and control server. You had to be able to be somebody that the folks cared about. So that's one of the reasons why we saw our number of truly affected customers. Now, everybody was affected by looking and saying, am I running one of the versions which is tainted? But when we look at the number of affected versions, it's actually not 18,000 which downloaded a piece of software. It's under 100 that went to a second stage. Used to say 9 agencies. GAO report came out and said 4 agencies went to a secondary target. So it had to be very specific. So we don't necessarily test that scenario, but we do test the scenarios of them, potentially entering our environment, making sure that the environment itself is as, resilient to attack from the outside. The other benefit of the red team, it tests my SOC, it tests my back-end systems and my recovery and my playbooks. All of those things get tested.
So the third tactic you guys have launched in your Secure by Design strategy is zero trust, something on everybody's mind these days.
So on a journey, right? I think zero trust is a journey, right? So part of our journey is to move the authentication authorization out to the edges, right?
In a software-defined perimeter kind of idea, or
you consider that we've got so many cloud properties, so many things that we've been moving towards from a cloud perspective, Office 365, Salesforce, you name it, are moving to essentially the cloud-based solution. So the more centralized we get authentication authorization, that's been a big push to use Azure SSO, conditional access. Now YubiKey for authentication authorization for all admins, all dev folks, and moving YubiKey out to the world because of the MFA overload that we've seen. That's got people concerned, right? That are you going to get them?
I'm worried about YubiKeys too, because we use them here at the Cyberwire. But if you're like me, I'm going to lose that Ubi key.
Right. So if you just keep it in your machine, it's the little ones. We keep it in the machine. It works pretty well.
Everybody I talked to on this show, Tim, is talking about how they're doing zero trust. You're a long way down that journey. Is there any one lesson learned that you wish you knew before you started that would have helped you in this, that you can part to all of our listeners here?
Yeah, I think just definitely start, right? Start your process, right? And
Yeah.
get from one app to two apps to three apps to four apps. I think we're up to I can't remember what my numbers are, but it's in the above 50, right? So, but start, right? Start down the process, because the benefits of having kind of central auth, the benefits of central auditing, the benefits of having central control are, worth their weight in gold. So, start the process. Don't be afraid that you have to have it all right or, all done. Because, get to 50%, get to 20%. It's better than you were yesterday.
Yeah. Like you said at the top, it's a journey, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get to the end anytime soon. Yeah. So the last tactic in your secure by design process is security awareness training. And it's a little different than most people think about it, I think, because of the software pipeline that we've been talking about. So what's involved in that part of that tactic?
Yeah, really, when you look at, kind of culture of security, right? How do we keep imbibing culture of security across the company? So some of those are having additional places to communicate security topics to people. So you get your annual training, that's normal. So we'll do newsletters, we'll do topical things out to people. We've been doing phishing campaigns pretty consistently for, I think, the last 6-7 quarters, right? And when somebody clicks on something, they get remedial training.
So we're getting towards the end of this, Tim. Any last words for the audience about your experience after the incident, and what can you recommend for everybody?
Yeah, so what worked for us is really making a focus on our customers, right? And that was our key focus, was how do we understand and help the customers get through it? And it took time, it was hard, it took a lot of effort, but the customers responded, right? We helped them move forward, we helped them get into the right place, and then be exemplary. So where can you be exemplary? Where can you do things that are not just okay, but really exemplary in process?